On an average school day, Haruka is sitting alone in his desk because he is a total loner. He is well aware that he is a loner, and as a matter of fact, he enjoys being alone since his only other option would be to hang out with his classmates, and he freaking hates them. There are a bunch of groups in the class, including the delinquents, the popular girls, the gym bros, and then there's the other people no one cares about. Haruka doesn't belong in any of these groups, and he is fine with that since he has a lot more time to read his books with no friends, but his reading session is interrupted when bright light appears beneath him. It looks like a summoning circle is spawning beneath the students, and for a moment Haruka got excited because he knows this means he gets to go on an isekai adventure, but then he realizes that he's been getting too much screen time for a loner. And if he knows anything about isekai, that means he's going to get screwed over somehow. He's not about to let himself become a victim before GTA 6 drops. So while the portal is still loading, he walks up to the door and tries to leave. Unfortunately, the door seems to be bolted shut with magic, so no matter how much force he uses, he isn't able to get out of the room. The portal is almost done loading, so his classmates begin disappearing, fading away, and as a last-ditch effort to avoid his otherworldly fate, Haruka decides to crawl into the ceiling vents to wait out the summoning circle. He jumps up and manages to crawl his way into the roof of the class. But just when he thought he was safe, the summoning circle followed him through the roof and he ended up getting summoned anyway. It sucks that he couldn't stay on Earth, but since he already knows how this kind of thing goes, he expects some kind of fat king or pretty princess to show up soon and ask for his help or something. However, that's not what happens as Haruka sees a bald old man frantically waving his arms around and panicking at the sight of Haruka. Apparently, the old man is God, and he was the one in charge of the summoning and has already sent all of Haruka's classmates off to the other world. But because Haruka came up with the idea to hide in the ceiling, while he still ended up getting summoned, his summoning was delayed, so God needs to send him to the other world quickly before he gets in trouble for this mess. He tells Haruka that he will get abilities to help him in the other world, but since he's late, all the good abilities have already been chosen, so the only things remaining are all the leftover ones that no one wanted. To list a few, he has the option of picking skills that equate to Minecraft Villager, Gambling Dice, Contact Lenses, and a Stick. And to make it worse, he only has a limited number of skills he can choose, so Haruka begins taking out his anger on the god for summoning him here and only having trash skills left. The god knows he messed up, but he didn't graduate from God University just to get yelled at by a high schooler. So he tells Haruka that he will give him all the remaining trash skills as an apology, but he doesn't want to see his ugly face around here anymore, so he teleports Haruka to the other world immediately. It's cool that he gets to have more skills than normal, but that doesn't do him much good if he gets tossed out into the woods as soon as he arrives. He's never lived in the woods before and he has no supplies, but then he notices a pouch on the floor and it turns out that it's a part of the Minecraft Villager skill, and the pouch allows him to store an unlimited number of items in his inventory. There's also a bunch of starter gear in there, so at least Haruka isn't going to be doing this without equipment. After he's got his stuff on, he decides to check his stats, but thanks to the gambling dice, he needs to roll a number to get stat points. He just goes with it and throws the dice on the ground, so as a result he ends up with a score of M, and he has no idea what M means, so he just decides to put the M points all into his luck stat. To his surprise, when he opens his stat window, his luck stat is completely maxed out, making him wish he used it on something better. He continues looking through his stats, and to his surprise, aside from all the trash skills, he actually gained 2 unique skills as well. Because he was such a loner on Earth, he will be unable to form a party in this world even if he wants to. But in exchange, his second skill allows him to force monsters to serve him because he wouldn't be able to make any friends otherwise. Haruka is a bit disappointed that he won't get a chance to make a harem for himself, but it is what it is. Right now, he's more concerned with the fact that he doesn't see any of his classmates nearby, and he finds that strange since this is supposedly the starting location. But then again, he never cared about them before, so why would he care about them now? Right now, he needs to focus on getting supplies so he can live a good life out here in the woods, but that's a lot easier said than done when he can barely see anything with all the trees in the way. At this rate, it won't be long before he runs into a monster accidentally, and if that were to happen, he would be a dead man for sure. Just then, Haruka remembers that he has a contact lens skill, so he puts on the contact lenses and suddenly he can see all kinds of information about his surroundings. It turns out that the contact lenses come with an inbuilt appraisal skill, and with it, he is able to easily traverse the forest and find some mushrooms that he can eat without dying. He decides to pick some, and thanks to his villager bag, he can take as many as he wants. He then goes over to the river nearby and uses his bag to fetch a little water to drink. But once he's done with that, something else catches his eye, so he wanders back into the forest where he finds a little cave. It looks too interesting for him to ignore, so Haruka says a little prayer in case there's a monster here that will attack him. And after that, he begins exploring the cave. Luckily, it looks like there aren't any monsters here, and this place is quite spacious, so he decides to make this his base of operations. He pulls out a tent and a magic lantern from his bag to set up camp, after which he then proceeds to light a small fire with his temperature control magic so he can stay warm for the night. Coincidentally, using his temperature magic once allowed him to unlock a new fire, and being wary of monsters made him acquire several detection skills as well, but Haruka's only attack skill is a stick, so he still needs to figure out a way to defend himself. The next morning, Haruka wakes up with a jolt, so nervously leaves his tent, and to his relief, it looks like there weren't any monster attacks overnight. He is safe all thanks to the anti-monster properties of his useless skill items. But even if he is safe from harm, it doesn't mean he's safe from her hunger, so he busts out a frying pan and cooks up some of the mushrooms he gathered yesterday. And if you're wondering where he got the frying pan, it was just sitting there in his villager bag along with a full set of kitchen knives and some beef jerky. So far, that bag has been the most useful thing in Haruka's arsenal, so he wonders what kind of villager stocked it up before he got it. In any case, now that he has eaten, he needs to figure out what he's going to do from now on, so he heads outside and takes a little walk to think. For now, that cave will work well as a base of operations, but Haruka still needs to worry about finding a reliable source of food and creating safety measures against any monsters that may try to attack him in this world. Fortunately, with his contact lenses, it shouldn't be too hard for him to gather enough food to last for a while, as he finds some more mushrooms and some herbs almost immediately, but he still has to figure out a solution to his monster problem. Just then, Haruka's detection skill kicks in, and he notices something going on nearby, so he decides to go check it out and is horrified once he realizes that the noise was caused by goblins. It would be bad enough if it was one, but there's two of them, and they both have strength stats that are higher than his own. He wonders if he will be able to take them down with his current strength, and he contemplates running away, but the fact that he is living in this forest means he will eventually have to fight the goblin if he wants to survive, so he chooses to get it over with while he still has the element of surprise. With that said, he isn't sure his stick will be good enough for the job on its own, so he tries using one of his trash to wrap the stick in magic to see if that does anything. It works out better than he thought, so he lunges out of the bushes and strikes at one of the goblins. After smacking it on the head, the goblin is dazed and confused, but Haruka doesn't stop there and proceeds to beat the daylights out of it until it finally dies. That's one down, but Haruka still has to deal with the other one, so as it charges at him, he dodges out of the way of its attack. Now that he has gotten a feel for it, Haruka realizes that the goblin's attacks are actually really easy to predict, so he effortlessly evades it and then proceeds to smack it around before hitting it with a wave of magic. Having just won his first fight against goblins, Haruka thinks that's enough work for the day and decides to head back to the cave so he can rest a little, and once he's back, he roasts some mushrooms for dinner and takes a look at the club he looted off the goblin corpse. It may have high damage, but it's heavy and has a short range, so Haruka decides to continue using his stick for now. He then checks the rest of his stats, and to his surprise, he managed to level up from the fight he had today, and not only that, all his existing stats were doubled as a result. By the next morning, Haruka wakes up and has breakfast as usual, but he is starting to get sick of eating nothing but mushrooms all the time. He really wishes he could eat some meat out here, but he's going to have to learn how to hunt to do that, and before that, needs to learn how to enhance himself first. The first thing he wants to try is the magic fusion skill he acquired, and for a quick explanation, it basically covers his entire body with magic in order to boost his physical and magical defenses. It also greatly increases his strength, so he should be able to fight with much more efficiency. Additionally, his appraisal skill was upgraded to level 2, so he uses it to see if anything has changed, but the only difference is that there's a question mark next to all the descriptions. Haruka has clearly never played video games before because he spends a whole minute trying to figure out what a question mark icon could mean, and eventually he just gives up on it altogether. Instead, he heads outside to do some magic training, and as he is leaving, he notices something on the floor, so he picks it up thinking it might be some meat, but it turns out to be another mushroom. It may be delusional, but Haruka was really hoping meat would just grow on trees in this world, and he soon realizes that he's not going to be finding any meat on the forest floor, so he decides to just go ahead with his magic training. He activates his mana infusion and takes a step forward, But with the physical boost he gets, he ends up flying forward by several meters. His body feels much lighter than before, and with very little effort, he can easily dart around the forest almost like he's teleporting. On top of that, his dexterity is greatly enhanced as well, so he can move and strike at things with precision. The first thing he does with his enhanced strength is challenge 2 random goblins, and unlike yesterday, he is able to knock the goblin out in one hit. He is feeling really confident about his new strength, so he thinks he can handle even more goblins, but when he actually sees a group of 3 goblins, he starts having second thoughts and slowly backs away before he gets jumped. He decides that he has worked hard enough for today and heads back to his cave so he can practice his magic. He continues this routine and practices fighting during the day, and by night, he starts tinkering with his magic to see what he can do with it. And apparently, he can make coffee tables. By following this routine, Haruka is able to eventually to one-shot a goblin and create a proper table with his magic crafting. So he then uses it to create a gate for his cave so he can go out at night. And that means he can finally go hunting. He goes after a rabbit because he hasn't tasted meat in so long, and when he finally catches up to it and is about to start cooking, he notices something else nearby. At first he thinks it's a goblin, but upon further inspection, he finds out that it's something even worse. Those are the delinquents from his class, and he really doesn't want to have to deal with them, so he intends to sneak away in the other direction, but as he starts heading that way, he realizes the popular girls are here as well, along with the gym bros and the nerds. He doesn't think the nerds are that bad since he occasionally hung out with them back in school, but he still doesn't want to have to talk to them though. Finally, he notices the student council group which has the class rep in it. And while he may hate socializing with the people in his class, he has to admit that the class rep has always been really nice to him. So it would be the least he could do to return that kindness, even if it's just to say hello. He briefly considers revealing himself and talking to her, but then again, he doesn't want to ruin the solitary life he already has. Since no one knows that he is here, he has the chance to be truly alone like he has always wanted. There's no idle chatter, no taxes, and no one to annoy him. So he really doesn't want to mess that up by having contact with his classmates because they are already pretty annoying. That's why he officially decides that he will ignore his classmates and live by himself so he can conquer this world alone. He then ducks into a bush to keep himself hidden as the delinquents approach, and one of them could have sworn he heard someone in this direction, and he is closing in on the bushes Haruka is hiding in. But as he checks inside, all he finds is the bunny, so he and the others continue walking. Haruka is relieved that they didn't find him, but he decides to follow them so he can figure out if they are planning something. He listens closely as the delinquents have a highly intellectual conversation about their class VP's chest, and Haruka is disappointed because he thought he would at least learn something useful from them. With no laws to stop them, Haruka is a little worried about what the delinquents might do to the girls, but he's sure the class rep will put a stop to whatever they are trying to do because she always does. However, Haruka soon overhears the delinquents talk about using a nerd called Tanaka for his ability so they can do whatever they want. The delinquents then get up to head back to camp, and Haruka can tell that they are up to no good, but he can't bring himself to intervene because that would require social interaction, and he is firmly against that. He heads back to his cave and starts grilling some mushrooms, but then he notices something that completely devastates him. His loner skill just leveled up, meaning even his status board recognizes him as a loner. This is probably because he chose to avoid his classmates, but still, it's not the worst thing that could happen. If anything, he would like to level up more because his overall level is still only 3. The main reason for this is that he has 2 skills that he can't level, his Jack of all trades and dummy skills. To be honest, he's not even sure what the skills do. Jack of all trades probably means he will be good at most things he tries, but he will never be able to become a master in any particular craft, and that's pretty straightforward. But as for the dummy skill, the best explanation Haruka can come up with is something to do with puppets, but he's not sure about it. He decides to give up on trying to figure out for now and just eat his dinner, but he still really wishes he had some meat. Haruka calls it a day and goes to bed for the night, but as he is trying to get some sleep, he hears a huge ruckus outside, and he can't just ignore it, so he gets up to figure out what's going on. As he left his cave, he was expecting to see the delinquents up to no good again, but to his surprise, it was actually the nerds this time. They are currently fighting a bunch of goblins, and it looks like they are having a bit of trouble, so Haruka considers helping them out, but he changes his mind once he sees their stats. They've got skills that are way better than his, and they are all level 16 while Haruka is still level 3. He figures they'll be alright without him, so he turns to walk away, but just before he leaves, he spots 2 goblins sneaking up behind the group, and the nerds are already struggling as things are, so if they get attacked from behind, and they'll be wiped out for sure. Haruka is still on the fence about whether he should help them or not, But then he remembers the time the nerds shared their holographic Charizard with him, and he then decides that they are worth saving. He runs out of the bushes with a stick in hand, and he easily one-shots both goblins in one swing. He then turns to the nerds and asks them if they are alright, and the nerds are fine, but they are shocked to see Haruka out here. Once they've gotten reacquainted, the nerds thank Haruka for his help, but he is having a hard time communicating with them since he hasn't spoken to real people for a long time now. He eventually takes them all back to his place, and the nerds are all amazed by how nice the interior is considering it's a cave. Haruka explains that he learned a little earth magic and crafting to help with the remodeling, but the nerds still think it's impressive that he did all this by himself. Haruka prepares a drink for them all and asks why they are out in the middle of the woods so late at night. The nerds suddenly fall silent when the topic is brought up, and after a few seconds, they tell Haruka that they are actually on the run from the rest of the class right now. It all started after the class first got isekai'd here, and at first everyone was just surprised by everything that just happened, but they were soon faced with the reality that they are stuck here, and they started freaking out over it. A few of them were more calm about the situation, like the popular girls who seemed like they were more annoyed than scared, the jocks who were trying to figure out what to do but knew nothing about isekai, and the nerds who were totally within their element. The class rep was just as confused as everyone else, but she has the common sense to realize that crying in an unknown forest is a good way to attract unwanted predators and get them all killed, so she tries to get everyone to quiet down. However, it was too late as a group of goblins had already found the class, and the class rep has no idea how to handle these monsters, so she starts freaking out. Everyone else is freaking out as well, even the delinquents, but the nerds know someone has to handle this, so they all activate their skills so they can take down the goblins. The gym bros join in to help, and soon enough, all the goblins have been defeated, but it still isn't safe to be out here, so the class rep gets everyone's attention and says they should all find somewhere safe to stay before they get attacked again. A little while later, the class settled on setting up camp by the river, and the nerds took it upon themselves to teach everyone how to survive in this world with all the isekai knowledge they possessed. The duties were evenly divided among all the members of the class, and everything seemed like it was going well until the popular girls suddenly said, "Nah, we don't want to do any work." The class rep tried to convince them that the work was necessary, and all they had to do was help set up the tents, but the girls just didn't want to bother with it. And since the popular girls weren't doing anything, the delinquents decided that they would be lazy as well, leaving the class rep and the nerds to do all the work instead. On top of that, the nerds went out of their way to handle all the monsters that would try to attack the camp, and while it seemed like a lot of work, they had to do this for their own sake. Back in the White Room, the nerds saw two particularly disturbing skills get chosen. One was the charm spell that grants control over people, and another troubling one was the puppeteer skill, which pretty much does the same thing. They knew that one of the delinquents possessed the puppeteer skill, so the nerds wanted to level up quickly in order to be able to defend themselves against the delinquents. However, at night, the delinquents would go out and slay monsters as well, but only for the sake of leveling up so they can use their skills. And while the nerds were eavesdropping on them, they began talking about how they will turn the girls into their slaves once they have enough levels to use their skills. The nerds realized that this would mean a lot of trouble, so they went to warn the class rep about it. However, just a few days later, the delinquents had leveled up enough to use their skills, and the class rep just so happened to be nearby, so they planned to make her their first victim. However, they ended up getting jumped by the nerds, and once they were down, their skills were sealed away, so they wouldn't be able to cause any harm. Now the delinquents are basically powerless, and as you would expect, the girls didn't take it well when they found out about the plan the delinquents had made, so the delinquents were kicked out of the camp. That would have been the end of it, but the delinquents were petty, so later that night, while the nerds weren't around to beat them up, the delinquents attacked the camp just to mess with everyone and ended up burning everything to the ground. Once there was nothing left, the delinquents retreated back into the forest, and by the time the nerds returned to camp, they were devastated to discover that all their hard work had been destroyed. Worse yet, the popular girls somehow blamed them for all the destruction and were giving them a really hard time for antagonizing the delinquents. The class rep stood up for them and reminded everyone that the nerds are the only reason they've been surviving out here so far, and the nerds appreciated the class rep having their backs, but they couldn't spend another minute in a camel full of such ungrateful people, which is why they all went on the run. After hearing the whole story, Haruka feels really bad for them, so he decides to host a feast of mushrooms for them that night. He actually enjoyed spending time with other people for once, but by the next day, the nerds had to leave because they planned on heading downstream to find a village and start their lives as adventurers. They offer to let Haruka join them because they consider him a friend, and while Haruka thinks of them as friends as well, he still has to decline their offer because he believes his trash skills would only hold the nerds back. With that said, he is also a bit worried about the situation at the class camp, mostly because the class rep is still there, and she's the only other person in the class that he likes, so he decides to go check it out. Along the way, he randomly runs into a kobold, and the thing bites him a lot, but ultimately, he manages to kill it and continue his journey. By nighttime, he arrived at the riverside where the class camp should have been, but surprisingly, the place is totally deserted. He assumes they must have moved somewhere else, so he uses one of his detection skills to pick up some footprints and follows them until he eventually comes across the popular girls. Of everyone in the class, Haruka hates dealing with them the most, so he tries to turn around and head home, but the girls have already started chasing him. Haruka would have no trouble outrunning them, but he stops dead in his tracks when he hears them say the word please. In all the years Haruka has known them, please has never been in their vocabulary, so something serious must have happened for them to be this desperate. He decides to talk to them after all, and the first thing the girls do is ask him if he knows where the nerds went. Haruka is hesitant to tell them because he thinks they just want to yell at the nerds some more, but on the contrary, the girls actually want to apologize to them. They now realize how much the nerds were doing for them, and they sincerely want to make amends for the way they treated them, but by now the nerds are long gone, so there's no way the girls would ever catch up to them. To begin with, they can't make it out of the woods by themselves, and they can't defend themselves from monsters, so how do they intend to find the nerds? He asks them if they have the resolve to do whatever it takes to apologize to the nerds, but the girls break down crying because they know that they'll die in no time if they are left out in the woods by themselves. They plead with Haruka to teach them how to survive out here, and he is so stunned by their sudden request that he ends up agreeing to it without thinking. As a result, Haruka's subjugate ability activates, and all of a sudden, the girls have become his subservient followers. Now all they do is blankly stare at him and finish off monsters whenever Haruka gets into a fight, and then they pull out the magic crystal and present it to him like puppies looking for praise. Haruka really isn't happy with how things are going, but for now, he notices that one of the girls has a small injury on her arm, so he hands her a healing potion he made so she can recover. However, she just uses it on him instead. He's getting really sick of how the girls only do things for his benefit now, and he is really worried about how he's going to explain this to the class rep if he runs into her, and right on cue, the class rep just so happened to be walking through that part of the woods at the moment. Once the class rep gets Haruka's attention, Haruka panics because he doesn't know what to say to her, and come to think of it, he doesn't actually know what her name is. They've been in the same class since elementary school, and the class rep has always been nice to him, so she can't believe he never bothered to learn her name. A few moments later, the rest of the girls from the class show up since everyone aside from the popular girls are following the class rep's orders. Speaking of the popular girls, class rep notices them standing behind Haruka, but they look like they are currently sharing a single brain cell, so class rep thinks Haruka must have done something to them. He would like to say he's innocent, but the fact of the matter is that even if he didn't mean to do it, his skill turned the girls into his servants and he doesn't know what to do about it. He tries his best to explain the situation without making himself seem like the bad guy, but none of the girls actually believe him, so Haruka gives up on trying to prove his innocence and turns to walk away. Unfortunately, class rep forces him to stay while she checks on Shimazaki to make sure she's alright, and luckily, a little shaking is all it took for the subjugation to be undone, so Shimazaki tells class rep that she's alright. Class rep is relieved to hear that, and Haruka thinks that means he can leave now. But class rep still wants to find out how the whole subjugation thing happened in the first place, so she refuses to let Haruka go yet. While the girls are talking, Haruka is left alone by a tree, and since he's got nothing to do, he decides to try practicing his magic so he can expand his house once he gets home. He begins trying to figure out how to make a basement, but he messes it up and accidentally buried himself in the ground from the neck down. He's stuck like that until the class rep finds him, and she is shocked to find him buried in the dirt when she just asked him to wait a few minutes, but boredom can make a guy do crazy things. She goes over Haruka's head to grab him so he can get out of the dirt, and once he is free, she apologizes for not trusting him since Shimazaki told her that he was just trying to help everyone. Haruka doesn't recall ever saying he would help everyone, but class rep and the other girls are already thanking him, so he decides to just go with it. Since everything has been settled, he wants to head back home, but the girls start getting mad because he wants to leave them out in the wilderness without helping at all. Class rep realizes Haruka just mentioned having a home, so she asks him about it, and Haruka explains that he had some spare time on his hands, so he just kind of built a house. Class rep can't believe he managed to build an entire house by himself, while they've been struggling to manage a camp, and the other girls are extremely impressed as well, so they call a meeting and begin talking amongst themselves. Class rep asks how many people Haruka's house can accommodate, and from the way he designed it, it would fit about 200 people, but you have to move some furniture around and empty the indoor pool though. Class rep is really jealous of how well Haruka is doing for himself, and as much as she hates to bother him, she asks if she and the other girls can stay with him for the night since they are all currently homeless. Haruka freaks out because it's one thing to invite guys to stay over for the night, but this is an entire class worth of girls, and he's having a hard time controlling himself. Once he calms down, Haruka begins leading them all to his house, but because of all the time he has spent roaming these woods, Haruka is far better at getting around. One of his skills even gives him helpful pointers to keep him going in the right direction. Eventually, Haruka makes it back to his house with the girls, and after catching their breath, they are stunned by the magnificence of Haruka's house. It's been so long since they've had a roof over their heads or gotten to experience the wonders of indoor plumbing, so as soon as Haruka mentions that there's a bath over in that direction, the girls start frantically running towards it and strip down right there in front of Haruka. There's no way he can handle spending an entire night in the same room with all of them, so he sets up a tent so he can be alone and prepares to go to sleep. Just then, class rep walks into his tent because there's something she wanted to talk to him about. First of all, she thanks him for all his help because she wouldn't have known what to do without him. After the nerds left, the gym bros decided to leave as well, so the girls were all left on their own. It's been tough, but now that they've had a bath and a good meal, the girls are all in high spirits once more. Still, even though the things worked out eventually, class rep feels like she has failed as a representative because she couldn't do anything to help the class's situation by herself. Haruka thinks she's being a little too hard on herself because up till now, she's been the one protecting the girls and kept them together. That may be true, but class rep says they just got lucky because they didn't run into any monsters out there, but if they had, she would have been powerless to protect the class, unlike the nerds. Again, Haruka doesn't think she is being fair to herself because the nerds have practically spent their whole lives preparing for this situation, so it's natural that they would be able to handle themselves well. However, on her end, this was the first time he had ever even heard about isekai, so all things considered, she has been doing pretty well. Class rep feels a lot better after hearing him say she did a good job, although her accomplishments still seem insignificant compared to Haruka, who created a functioning household in just a week. She wishes him a good night and heads back inside, but with everything that happened today, there's no way Haruka is getting any sleep tonight. Early the next morning, Haruka wakes up and finds one of the girls sitting outside his tent and asking him to get up because breakfast is ready. It takes him a minute to realize what's going on, but when he finally does, he freaks out a little and says he actually wants to sleep in a little longer. The girl doesn't accept his answer and crawls on top of him to convince him to get out of bed, so Haruka gives up and asks what's for breakfast. He was expecting the usual mushroom soup with a side of extra mushrooms, but to his surprise, breakfast is actually fish today, and he is so excited that he accidentally headbutts the girl. The girl was slightly hurt, but Haruka couldn't care less because he finally gets to eat something other than mushrooms, and he absolutely loves it. Class rep doesn't understand why he is so excited to be eating fish when he has been living next to the river this entire time, but while that may be true, Haruka simply sucks at fishing, so he has never been able to catch any. For the girls to be so used to eating fish, they must have a reliable method of catching fish, so Haruka asks to see how they do it. Class rep agrees and takes Haruka at the river along with one of the girls who has a lightning magic skill. And as for how she catches fish, she kind of just electrocutes the water until the fish stop being alive. Haruka is really impressed, so he pleads with her to do it one more time. And while the girl doesn't really want to, she agrees anyway since Haruka is helping her out. She spawns another lightning ball, but before she could throw it in the river, Haruka takes the lightning ball and seals it with his packing skill. He then tosses it in the river and is able to catch some fish as well. But on top of that, he also acquired lighting magic, so he won't be needing Lightning Girl's help anymore. Class rep asks what he just did, so Haruka explains that by using his packing skill on a particular element, he can gain that kind of magic. It's probably an effect caused by a combination of his many skills, which is definitely useful, but he still doesn't think it's impressive since he still only has a bunch of useless skills. While the other girls are playing in the river, Haruka sits with class rep and asks what she and the other girls plan to do after this. Class rep says the details still aren't certain yet, but they plan to head for the nearest village to try and catch up with the nerds. However, they are going to need to level up if they plan to make it out of this forest on their own, so Haruka offers to help them train before they leave. A short while later, all the girls are gathered out in the forest, and before Haruka begins his training camp, he says he would like to know what their current levels are. The girls tell him that their levels are all above 15, and Haruka begins feeling depressed because he's still only level 7 after all this time in the forest. He's honestly starting to doubt that the girls even need his help to begin with, so he decides to give them a small test and sets them up to fight a bunch of kobolds to see how well they do. The girls think this will be a piece of cake since the kobolds are only level 6, but a few moments later, they've all had their asses handed to them and are down for the count. The girls had no idea that the kobolds would actually fight back, so they all head back to regroup and think of a new strategy. And for some reason, the strategy meeting is taking place in Haruka's magic tent. They can all fit since Haruka's tent is able to expand, but he still has no idea why they chose to come here. After a little deliberation, the girls head back out and they are sure they won't lose this time. Haruka is glad that they seem motivated, but he honestly doesn't think they'll be able to win this time either. Once they've left, the girl from this morning approaches Haruka and says she wants to apologize for her behavior this morning. She was intentionally getting close to him just to see if he would try to take advantage of the situation if given the chance. She admits that she didn't trust him at first, but he gave them a place to stay, food to eat, and is even helping them learn how to fight, so she feels like she can trust him, and she'll be back to wake him up tomorrow with his breakfast. Haruka is glad she trusts him and says he's looking forward to seeing her tomorrow, although he doesn't know her name, so he's just going to call her Fish Girl. The next morning, Haruka is happy to receive a fish from Fish Girl, but then he hears the other girls talking about going out to fight kobolds again for revenge. But before they can leave, class rep calls them back and says they need to train first because they are definitely going to lose again if they go back to fight now. She suggests they should practice by fighting goblins, but when they actually start a fight against the goblins, it doesn't go well for the girls. Despite this loss, some of the girls still think they are ready to fight the kobolds, although a bunch of them pretend to be sick to avoid having to fight anymore. Haruka doesn't think this is going to end well, so he is prepared to intervene if necessary. However, to his surprise, the girls actually learnt from their mistakes against the goblins and worked together to take down the kobolds. Class rep congratulates them all on their victory, and Haruka is relieved because this means the girls can handle themselves and won't need to stay with him anymore. He believes he can finally get back to his life as a loner, but class rep comes over and thanks him for agreeing to come with them to the nearest village. He knows for a fact he never said he would join them, but class rep is really insistent, so he caves in and agrees to go with her. A little while later, everyone has packed their stuff and they are ready to leave the forest, but Haruka reminds them that they don't know what they might run into out there, so they should all keep their guard up. At the same time, in a different part of the forest, one of the boys from the class is seen running for his life when he makes the mistake of turning around and trips over a rock. He is now cornered by his attacker and has nowhere to run, so he ends up getting strangled to death on the spot. Haruka's top priority right now is ensuring the safety of the girls since the delinquents are sure to come after them, and to do that, he needs to get them out of the forest. A little while later, Haruka runs into a giant orc, and he sees this as a good opportunity to teach the girls how to defend themselves properly, so he tells them to stand back and watch how he handles it. He charges at the orc with his stick, so the orc raises its club and tries to clobber him into the ground, but when it looks down, it realizes our boy isn't there anymore. Haruka is currently hiding behind a tree, and with how slow the orc is, it will never hit him. But if Haruka wants to fight back, he needs to think of a plan. He remembers the nerds telling him that physical attacks aren't effective against orcs, so the safest bet to defeat them is to use a bunch of magic. Haruka pulls up his stat window to check if he has any usable magic, and he's got all the elements at his disposal thanks to his packing skill. But before he gets the chance to use any of them, the orc finds his hiding spot and uses its club to destroy the tree, so Haruka is forced to dodge its strikes until he has finally had enough and appears behind the orc with his stick before knocking it to the ground. It turns out that the orc died from that, and he wasn't expecting that since physical attacks aren't meant to work against this thing. The girls are upset because they didn't actually get to learn anything from him one-shotting the orcs, so Haruka apologizes and says he will use magic to defeat the next one so they can learn. The next time Haruka spots an orc miming its own business, he prepares a flame spell in his hand and just casually chucks it at the orc. As the spell collides with the orc's face, the monster goes down and doesn't get back up again. So the girls are even more upset because they'll never learn to defend themselves if he keeps killing everything instantly. Later that night, the group has a lot of pub meat on hand, so they celebrate with a barbecue. While everyone is having fun though, Haruka is in the back setting up as many traps as he can so they don't get attacked while they sleep. His tent also has properties that prevent detection by enemies, so with this he thinks they'll be alright. Next, he wants to plan out the route they'll be taking tomorrow morning, So he activates his map skill and is checking out the path up ahead when all of a sudden, his perception skill alerts him to the presence of someone nearby, so he goes to investigate. He notices 4 male figures emerging from the dark, so he is worried it might be the delinquents at first, but as the guys approach, he realizes it's just the gym bros, and he is relieved since he won't have to fight them. At the same time, Class Rep was looking for Haruka and notices him talking to 4 guys over in the distance. Even if they aren't hostile, Haruka still wonders what the gym bros are doing out here to begin with. He assumes they must have been after the girls, but the bros adamantly deny it and say they came here looking for Haruka. He decides to believe them, but he still doesn't understand why they were going through all that trouble to avoid the girls though. The bros explain that they can't trust the girls, and they inform him of the skill that was even worse than charm and puppeteer skills that the delinquents wanted to use. Haruka recalls seeing something about a hijack skill, and that's exactly what the gym bros were referring to. The delinquents were really vocal about all the things they wanted to do with their mind control skills, but not once did they mention anything about the hijack skill, so that means they didn't have it. And if the delinquents didn't have it and the nerds didn't have it either, then that means one of the girls must have the skill and is keeping it hidden from everyone. Haruka decides to mess with the bros a little and tells them that he may be the one with the hijack skill, but the bros don't seem that worried. In fact, they seem relieved because they know Haruka is so much of a loner that he would never actively seek out people to hijack their skills. Haruka admits that he doesn't have the hijack skill, although he does have a subjugate skill that can turn people into his pets, but he prefers not to use it. Anyway, the bros just wanted to fill him in on the dangers of the hijack skill, so they say they are heading back into the woods to keep an eye on the delinquents since they seem pretty suspicious. Before they leave, they ask Haruka to apologize to Class Rep and the rest of the girls for them since they ditched them without warning. The next day, everyone gets up and all the girls seem a lot more energetic than normal, so Haruka steps away because all their energy is draining him. As he is walking away, Class Rep comes up behind him and says she has something she wants to tell him. She nervously fidgets about and is about to tell Haruka that she is the one who has the hijack skill, but Haruka already knew about that a long time ago. He has an appraisal skill after all. Class Rep is shocked that he knew since the only people who know about her skill are the nerds. She asks why Haruka didn't say anything before now if he knew and why he still chose to help her, but Haruka simply didn't think it was that big of a deal. She asks if he's not afraid of her because hijack is a skill that allows her to steal another person's skills by killing them, so anyone would be afraid of it. But again, Haruka doesn't think there's anything to be worried about. The nerds probably weren't worried about her having the skill either since they knew about it, and while they sealed the charm and puppeteer skills from the delinquents, they left Class Rep with her hijack skill. That must mean they at least trust her to not abuse it, and the same goes for Haruka, because he knows that there's no way she could ever kill someone. Class Rep is moved to tears after hearing that Haruka trusts her that much, and Haruka thinks it's funny since she's been crying a lot more often over the past few days, but she says it's his fault she has been crying so much. The group continues traveling through the forest, and after they've traveled a considerable distance, Haruka tells everyone they can take a break for now and pulls out a box of juice to sell to the girls. Unfortunately, none of them have any money, so one of the girls offers to pay in some other way if he gives her some juice, but Class Rep puts a stop to that immediately, so the girl doesn't get any juice. After the short break, the group gets moving again, and they are currently ahead of schedule, but it's still going to be dark before they make it to the village, so they'll have to camp outside again. Just then, Haruka notices a river nearby and he thinks this is the perfect opportunity to try something out, so he asks Class Rep to look after the rest of the girls while he goes scouting. She asks if she can come with him, but Haruka wants to do this alone, so he speeds off before she can follow him. While running through the woods, Haruka activates his magic boost skill to reinforce his body, and then he casts weight magic on himself to make himself lighter. With this combination, he is able to move faster than ever before, and with enough force, he believes he should be able to fly, so he gives his theory a test and jumps high into the sky. It looks like it's working at first, but then he starts going back down, and before he knows it, he has crash landed on the forest floor. He nearly died from that fall, so he decides not to try that anymore and heads back to camp. But when Class Rep sees how badly injured he is, she gets really worried and asks what happened. Haruka explains that he launched himself up really high, but then gravity happens, so he kind of fell and nearly died. Class Rep starts yelling at him for doing something so dumb, but if it makes it any better, Haruka did manage to spot some berries while he was up in the sky, so he offers to make some juice for Class Rep, but Class Rep doesn't want any, so Juice Girl comes up to him and starts asking for juice again. The next day, everyone gets moving again and things seem to be going smoothly, aside from the girl that got lost and the orcs that they ran into. But despite these inconveniences, the group still managed to make it out of the woods together. All the girls are ecstatic to finally be out of the forest since the village shouldn't be much farther now, but Haruka is a bit on edge since they are vulnerable out in the open like this. The hills are blocking his views and he can't tell where the village is, so he looks into his stat window to see if there are any skills in there that could help his situation, and to his surprise there's a new airwalk skill. He must have gotten it from his failed attempt at flying yesterday, so he tries it out, and sure enough, he starts walking on air. Class rep notices that Haruka is gone, so she starts looking around for him and is shocked to see him floating in the air. Haruka looks down at her and says he just wants to do some scouting to make sure the road up ahead is safe. He looks out into the distance and things seem pretty peaceful at first, but then he notices a group of villagers being attacked by wolves. He comes back down and tells class rep that he didn't see much aside from a couple of people being attacked by wolves. Class rep thinks they need to go help them, but just because they are being attacked by monsters doesn't mean they are good people. All the girls think they should hurry over to save the people, but at this distance, none of them will make it in time even if they run, and what if the people turn out to be bandits or something? He personally doesn't want to take any risks that would put the group in danger, so he suggests that they should just ignore them and keep going. He begins walking away, but class rep grabs his arm and pleads with him to reconsider. She says that if the people turn out to be bandits and try to attack them, then she will fight them off, but in case they turn out to be good people, she wants to save them. Haruka already knew class rep would be determined to help people even if it puts her in danger, but as things are, the girls still suck at fighting, and there's not much they could do to help even if they went, so Haruka says he will handle it by himself instead. The people are too far away for him to run to, and even if he tries the weight magic from yesterday, he probably still won't make it, so he decides to try something new. He casts the magic boost and weight magic on himself, and as a final touch, he uses a powerful wind spell to act as a propellant. The spell is so powerful that class rep ends up getting caught in it. But Haruka doesn't notice, so he blasts off and is headed straight for the villagers. While using airwalk to keep himself airborne, Haruka notices something tugging on his cape, so he turns around and is shocked to see class rep hanging onto him for dear life. She is terrified and explains that she got sucked in by his wind spell, and they are way too high up for her to let go at this point, so she's tagging along for the ride. As they start getting close to the villagers, class rep tells Haruka to stop, but about that, he never actually thought of a way to stop, so they end up crash landing in the middle of the fight between the villagers and the wolves. As a result, class rep is knocked out, all the wolves are instantly killed, and the people are left in utter disbelief. While class rep is still out cold, the leader of the group thanks Haruka for saving them and introduces himself as Ofter, and his friend is Gatek. If Haruka hadn't shown up, Ofter's entire party may have been wiped out, so he is truly grateful to him. Haruka asks what they are doing out here, so Ofter and Gatek explain that wolves have been attacking merchants out in these plains, so the Adventurers Guild put out a request for the wolves to be exterminated, and they thought they could handle it at first, but they quickly got overwhelmed. Their carriage has been destroyed, so they are going to have to carry everything back to the village by hand, and since there's not much for Haruka to do until the rest of the girls catch up, he decides to share some of the roasted mushrooms he carries on himself for emergencies. Gatek is surprised Haruka would share something like this with them since these are stamina-capped mushrooms and they are extremely rare because they restore a person's stamina almost immediately. The rest of the girls from class soon show up, and they are excited to meet the elf and knight ladies in Ofter's party, so they all get along well. Ofter offers to lead them all to the town he came from, so before long the group arrives at the town of Omu, and they are excited to finally be back in civilization. Meanwhile, back in the forest, the delinquents have been leveling up a lot over the past few days, and now that they've got a good amount of experience, they intend to go after the girls and get their revenge. But before they do that, they have to get their puppeteer and charm skills unsealed, so they will going after the nerds first. This was the end of episode 4. Subscribe to not miss the next part.